Maryville, Missouri, United States. At first glance, Daisy Coleman's life seemed perfect. Outwardly attractive, smart, and talented, she hid behind this facade a wounded soul that had endured horrifying events in her youth. Born on March 30, 1997, in the small town of Albany, Missouri, Daisy grew up in a family where her father Michael worked as a doctor, and her mother Melinda as a veterinarian. Being the second child, Daisy had 3 brothers. Fate dealt its first blow in 2009 when her father Michael died in a car crash while traveling to a wrestling competition. After this tragedy, the Coleman family moved to the larger town of Maryville, also in Missouri. Melinda was left alone with 4 children, but despite the difficulties, she managed to cope with this task. However, the real nightmare for the family was yet to come. Early in the morning of January 8, 2012, an event occurred that would forever change the life of 14-year-old Daisy. The girl regained consciousness lying in the yard of her own house in freezing temperatures. Her hair was frozen to the ground, and she was wearing only a t-shirt and sweatpants. Unable to get up or call for help, Daisy barely managed to crawl to the front door and weakly knock. Fortunately, her mother Melinda heard the knock and found her daughter on the doorstep. Daisy smelled strongly of alcohol, couldn't speak, and was only crying. Melinda immediately called for her son's help. Together, they carried Daisy into the house and tried to warm her up. Noticing signs of severe frostbite, the mother applied her veterinary knowledge to provide first aid. She gradually warmed her daughter's body in the bathtub, slowly increasing the water temperature. While undressing Daisy, Melinda noticed bruises and red marks on her body. At that moment, the woman realized that something terrible had happened to her daughter. Concerned about Daisy's condition, Melinda called the police. The arriving officers couldn't get a statement from Daisy due to her condition. Instead, they listened to the account of Daisy's friend, Paige, also known as Patch, who had stayed overnight at the Coleman's house. Paige recounted that on the evening of January 7, 2012, Daisy had invited her for a sleepover. The girls watched horror movies and secretly consumed alcohol from the Coleman family's home supply. Later, Daisy began texting with 17-year-old Matthew Barnett, a popular player on the school football team and a friend of her older brother. Matthew invited the girls to have some fun at his house. Around 1 a.m. on January 8th, the friends snuck out through the window of Daisy's bedroom and met Matthew and 4 of his buddies. The group went to the Barnett house where they entered the basement through a window, trying not to wake Matthew's parents upstairs. In the basement, Matthew began actively plying Daisy with alcohol. Paige watched as her friend drank one glass after another. At some point, one of the guys, Nicholas, took Paige to an adjacent empty room in the basement, where they became intimate at his initiative. Meanwhile, Matthew and Daisy secluded themselves in another room with a large bed. Paige saw several times what was happening there. Daisy was lying on the bed almost unconscious, unable to speak or move. Matthew took advantage of her helplessness and engaged in sexual intercourse with her. His friend Jordan Zek recorded the incident on his smartphone camera. Around 2 a.m., the group decided it was time to disperse. They drove the girls back to the Coleman house. Paige got out of the car first, and Matthew told her that Daisy needed to sit in the cold to sober up. The guys promised to stay with Daisy and look after her. Believing them, Paige returned to the house and went to sleep. After Paige left, the guys took Daisy out of the car and stood her up. When the girl vomited, they removed her shoes, took her bag and phone, holding her hair. Then they left Daisy on the cold ground near the house and drove away, fearing they might be noticed. Daisy lay in the freezing cold for about 3 hours in light clothing, without shoes or socks. Her hair was wet and frozen. The police, who arrived at Melinda's call, thoroughly examined the house and the surrounding area. In Daisy's room, they found 5 empty bottles of alcohol. Outside, they found Daisy's personal belongings and traces of vomit. In the morning, Daisy was taken to the hospital. Doctors documented bruises on her legs and tears in her genital area. Tests showed that her blood alcohol level was almost twice the legal limit. Coming to her senses a few hours later, Daisy couldn't remember the details of the previous night. She admitted that she had taken alcohol without her mother's permission and snuck out to meet the boys. On the afternoon of January 8th, police detained Matthew Barnett, Jordan Zek, and Nicholas Grumautis. They were taken to the station for questioning. Matthew didn't deny being intimate with Daisy, but claimed that everything happened by mutual consent. He said the girls were already drunk when he met them. At first, Matthew denied giving Daisy alcohol, but later admitted to pouring her several drinks. Jordan Zek initially refused to testify, but then confessed to filming Matthew kissing Daisy on his phone. The video lasted about 10 seconds. Jordan managed to show the clip to friends, but then got scared and deleted it. Nicholas immediately admitted his guilt regarding Paige and was sent to a juvenile detention center. Matthew's friend who drove the group told police that Daisy was crying constantly on the way back, and Matthew expressed fears that Daisy's brother, Charlie, might kill him if he found out what happened. It also came to light that a few days before the incident, Matthew had dined at the Coleman house in a friendly atmosphere. The same day, police searched the basement of the Barnett house, seizing bed linens, empty bottles, men's underwear, and plastic cups. During repeated interrogations, one of the officers seemed sympathetic to Matthew's story. He even suggested that girls sometimes do such things for attention and praised Matthew for driving Daisy home. However, the officer didn't address the fact that the boys had left her freezing outside. 2 months later, in March 2012, charges against Matthew Barnett and Jordan Zek were dropped. The district attorney considered that the sexual encounter between the young people had occurred by mutual consent. The deleted video was never recovered, although several of Jordan's classmates claimed to have seen it. Examination of Matthew and Daisy's correspondence revealed that they communicated about once a month. In the messages, Daisy hinted at her willingness to be intimate in exchange for alcohol. There were also mutual explicit messages sent before January 8th. After Matthew's release, it became known that he was the grandson of influential politician Rex Barnett, a former member of the state legislature. Rex Barnett was on the committee dealing with criminal law and public safety issues and had connections in the prosecutor's office and police throughout Missouri. Matthew and Jordan returned to their normal lives, while Daisy Coleman hoped the fuss around her story would die down. However, instead of support, she faced hostility and mockery from her peers. Most of her acquaintances took Matthew's side, and Daisy began to be called a liar and a slut. She became an outcast, withdrew into herself, and tried to spend more time at home alone. Daisy, who previously led an active social life and was involved in sports and dance, practically disappeared from the sight of those around her. She had to leave the school cheerleading team. Daisy's mother, Melinda, received daily anonymous threats at home and at work. Soon she was asked to resign from the veterinary clinic where she had worked for many years. After this, the Coleman family decided to leave Maryville. In the spring of 2013, their empty house, which was up for sale, burned down under unexplained circumstances. The police couldn't determine the cause of the fire, but rumors circulated about the involvement of Matthew Barnett's father. Later, under strange circumstances, the house of Daisy's friend, Paige, also burned down. By that time, the girls had stopped communicating, and Paige had also become an outcast at school, suffering from nightmares. Daisy's story attracted media attention. People from all over the country began to support her, especially those who had experienced similar trauma. Daisy managed to reopen the case against Matthew Barnett. In court, he was found guilty only of leaving Daisy alone on cold ground at night. Matthew was sentenced to 2 years of probation and ordered to pay the Coleman family compensation of $1,800. The other participants in the incident were not charged. Daisy Coleman continued to live, regularly receiving both support and threats from anonymous users online. She struggled deeply with each negative message directed at her. In 2016, when 19-year-old Daisy was in college, Netflix released a documentary called Audrie Daisy. It told the story of violence, bullying, and harassment on social media, as well as their consequences. Daisy became one of the main characters in the film, sharing her story. In 2018, Daisy decided to start a new life and moved to Colorado, where she got a job at a tattoo parlor. She was also working on a second film project focused on her healing process. However, in June of that year, Daisy received another blow from fate. Her mother, Melinda, and 19-year-old brother, Tristan, were in a car accident while on their way to visit her. Tristan died, and the circumstances of the accident were never clarified. After this tragedy, Daisy wrote on social media that it was becoming increasingly difficult for her to keep her inner demons at bay and pretend that everything was okay. After her brother's death, Daisy became one of the founders of SafeBAE, a charitable organization that helped victims of sexual violence, especially among middle and high school students. She continued to share her personal tragedy and support other people who found themselves in similar situations. In her posts, Daisy often talked about how difficult it was for her to cope with her inner thoughts. She struggled with emotional pain, panic attacks, and constant nightmarish memories. In the summer of 2020, 23-year-old Daisy Coleman began complaining to friends that she was being stalked by an unknown man who constantly sent her threats. She contacted the police about this, filing a report that the unknown person had been following her since December 2019. Daisy begged for help, but it seemed her pleas went unheard. On August 4, 2020, Daisy posted on Twitter that she was afraid to leave the house. She couldn't even walk her dog or go to work because she was scared. She wrote that she had stopped eating and sleeping properly. A few hours later, Daisy published a new post on Facebook saying that a man had approached her house and knocked on the door. Daisy wrote that she was very scared. She suspected that this man might have stolen her keys and could now easily break into her apartment. In the same post, Daisy wrote that this unknown man had stolen her photos and registered on a website now offering intimate services for money from this fake account in her name. Daisy's mother, Melinda, after reading her daughter's messages on social media, immediately called the Colorado police and asked them to check on Daisy. Around 4 p.m., officers arrived at the girl's house. She let them in, and they spent about an hour with her. Daisy again told them about being stalked by an unknown man. The officers didn't notice anything unusual in the young woman's behavior and left. Shortly after the police left, 23-year-old Daisy Coleman video called her boyfriend. During the conversation, she took out a gun, pointed it at herself, and pulled the trigger. Her boyfriend didn't immediately understand what had happened. The connection was lost, and Daisy stopped responding to calls. In a panic, he immediately called 911. When police officers returned to Daisy Coleman's house around 8 p.m., they found the girl already lifeless. Daisy's mother, Melinda, announced her daughter's death by posting an emotional message on social media. She wrote, "She was my best friend and an amazing daughter. I wish I could have taken her pain away. She never recovered from what those boys did to her back in high school. And it's just not fair. My baby girl is gone." Melinda confessed that she had fought for years for Daisy's mental health. The woman believed she had done everything possible for her beloved daughter. She confirmed that Daisy had indeed been stalked in recent months and added that Daisy had recently learned she would never be able to have children. After Daisy's death, another disturbing event occurred. The tattoo parlor where she worked was robbed. The thief stole an album with Daisy's unique drawings and her personal tattoo machine. 4 months later, in December 2020, another tragedy struck. 58-year-old Melinda Coleman posted another touching message on social media dedicated to her late daughter. After this, the woman took a gun and followed Daisy, committing suicide. Only 2 sons remained in the Coleman family, the older Charlie and the younger Logan. SafeBAE, the charitable organization founded by Daisy, organized a fundraiser to support the brothers. Meanwhile, it became known that Matthew Barnett's life and career were going well and successfully. After the deaths of Daisy and her mother Melinda, Matthew expressed words of regret about the tragedy that befell the Coleman family. Daisy Coleman's story became a symbol of the fight against sexual violence and the culture of silencing such crimes. Her tragic fate drew public attention to the problems faced by victims of violence and contributed to the start of a broader discussion about the need for changes in society and the justice system. Daisy Coleman's case, along with other similar cases like Audrie Potts' story, became a catalyst for the movement against sexual violence on campuses and in society as a whole. It raised important questions about rape culture, how society and law enforcement respond to allegations of sexual assault, and the long-term consequences of trauma for victims. Daisy's activism, her participation in the documentary, and the creation of SafeBAE helped many other victims of violence find their voice and support. However, her own struggle with the consequences of trauma, depression, and stalking shows how complex and lengthy the healing process can be. The tragic end of Daisy and her mother, Melinda, underscores the need for more effective support not only for victims of violence, but also for their families. Their story demonstrates how trauma can affect entire families for many years and reminds us of the importance of long-term psychological help and support. Ultimately, Daisy Coleman's story remains a powerful reminder of the need to continue the fight against sexual violence, support victims, and work to change cultural norms and the justice system. Her legacy lives on through those she helped and through the ongoing work of SafeBAE. Thank you for watching this video. Write your opinion in the comments, and also do not forget to put a like if you like this story. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.